Hi, I'm Michael Otey, Senior Technical Director for Windows IT Pro Magazine, and I'm here with Sean Deuby, another Technical Director for Windows IT Pro Magazine, and Jeffrey Snover, Distinguished Engineer and Lead Architect for Windows Server. And we're going to talk about some of the new enhancements with Windows Server today, and some of the things we can look forward to seeing as this new version comes up, and things that can help IT pros get ready for it. But before we start off, Jeffrey, you want to tell us a little bit about your background and some of the things that brought you to where you're at today?
Yeah, sure. I've been in the industry about 31 years, most of that in the area of network and systems management. I've been working at Microsoft now about 12 years. Came and worked on the management technologies, at some point invented PowerShell, and then am now the lead architect for Windows Server for about a year and a half now.
So what does lead architect for Windows Server mean? What does that role mean for you in a day-to-day or in a overall basis?
Yeah, so basically it's a couple things. One is we have people that are very specific to a feature, right? The architect for that feature, and we've got world-class people in that. And then my role is to kind of look across the scenarios and make sure that they're all fitting together. And then in general, the job of an architect is to be what I call the guardians of the long term, which is to say, hey, that's great, but how's that going to fit in the next release and the release after that? And so that's what I do for Server, to figure out how not just to deliver a great product in this release, but to use this release to set up the next one and the next one.
Right, so you have to focus on what I call lifting your vision up beyond just the near term, just the road in front of you, and actually be looking further down towards the horizon.
Yeah, exactly. I once had a boss who explained it this way. He said, any fool can get the X ball into the pocket. The key is to do it in such a way that the cue ball is lined up to get the next one and then the next one. So that's really what, as architects, we're doing, is to try and deliver, but then deliver in a way that we're set up to do the next one and the next one.
Right.
That's an interesting concept. Maybe that kind of explains you say you invented PowerShell. It seems like with this release, PowerShell's become a pretty important component of the next Windows Server 8 release, and perhaps PowerShell is one of the setup balls that you had for this one coming into it.
Absolutely. If you take a look at the Monad Manifesto, which is the kind of the leading vision, really I had it kind of all dialed in then. And if you take a look at version 1 and then version 2 and then version 3, you can just see it filling out the vision, and then also like why, right? So key is to produce a value proposition, get the early adopters in, then establish the next set of things, and it's just this well-defined structure.
Actually, that makes me think of we have something we talked about before, which you called scenario-based engineering, I believe.
Yeah.
And when Mike and I were at the Reviewers Workshop, we were astounded by the number of features that came out in the product, how they all depended on each other, and everything worked. I mean, it was quite amazing to see that. And you said at the time this was as a result of doing scenario-based engineering. And I wonder if you could explain a little bit more on what it is and how it differs from previous development cycles.
Yeah. So first, what we did was we spent a lot of time just like put down your pens and think. Right? Planning, talking to customers. Hey, what is your problems? Where are your heartburn? Where's the market going? What are the competitors doing? What are the issues? What are the technology innovations? So as part of planning, we have these 3 threads: the voice of the customer, the voice of the business, and the voice of the technology. And we merge those all together. Now, not everyone's involved in that. Large group of us are. The other group is getting the engineering system in place, but it's a lot about getting ready. And then we go and we define the vision, right? So our executives say, hey, based upon all that, thank you very much, got all the data, here's where we're going to go. And they define the vision. And then from the vision, we derive a set of scenarios. Okay, so to implement that vision, here's what success would look like. And then that scenario breaks down to sub-scenarios and then features. And then at each level, we have what we call CTQs, which stands for critical to quality, which is to say sort of like an acid test. Like if this was true, you should be able to do this, and you should be able to do this, and you should be able to do this, and I can measure those things. And so then my joke is that at Microsoft, you can't get anything done until you can reduce it to an Excel spreadsheet with an item, someone's name, and a red or green box.
Right.
It's surprising how many businesses are that way, yeah.
And so that's what we did.
Right.
And this big hierarchy of things, therefore you guys are going to do this, and you're going to do it on this date, and then that's going to feed into this, and that's going to feed to this. And then we got this excellent staff of PMs that go and then keep track of this, both at the detail level and the cross-cutting concerns, and basically test, hey, is it really working?
Right, so one of the basic tenets of such a successful enterprise that you put together is that there's always somebody's neck on the line for a deliverable.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Sean, you mentioned some of the features of the workshop, and I know that's something that you and I, we attended here not so long ago, and you presented some of the things there. And we were pretty much blown away by all the new features that are coming up in Windows Server 2000 or Windows Server 8. I know there's way too many to possibly talk about all of them, but what are some of the highlights for you of what we're going to see?
Well, as a technologist, I always approach it from the technology, right? So the marketing guys will go through all those scenarios, and those are great. But for me, as a technologist, I look at the technology innovations. And here, I have to say, we've had great releases of Windows in the past, but honestly, I think that this is by far the largest, most transformative release we've ever had, right? So we got major innovations in storage. Honestly, in the past, we've had some weakness in our storage stack, and people ended up having to go buy very expensive, very high-end storage arrays to do some of the things that they wanted to do. Now, if you have those things, you're going to get more value out of them because we had a close partnership with those storage vendors. But then a lot of the things that you could only get from the storage arrays, you're going to get with in-box storage. So if you sit down and look at the details, every single layer of the storage stack, there's transformation. The way we deal with disks, the way we deal with the file system, the way we cluster things together.
Right, yeah, you don't have this enormous cost jump to cluster something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and then scale. So storage is just phenomenal. And by the way, that's sort of a theme that excites me so much. Often you'll go out and you'll see somebody out there that says, oh, we do X, and that's great, but what it is it's a bolt-on top of the base system. This is not a bunch of bolt-ons. This is like the hard engineering work to make it work at all levels. So that's in the storage stack.
Right. Some of the things that really jumped out on me on the storage side, there was the built-in data deduplication capabilities. That was pretty amazing.
Yep, everything depended on it, and it just works.
The total revamp of the check disk kind of operations, where it was much more efficient and online and dynamic, and then the ability to take advantage of the storage back-end arrays, where you wouldn't have to funnel the I/O through the servers, and instead, when you're doing a file copy on that back-end array, you can tell it to take advantage of those kinds of things that are built in, and those are big changes, and they're obviously baked into the hardware at a pretty deep level.
Right.
And the operating system.
Right, and the whole storage spaces, the ability to go take a bunch of inexpensive disks and pool them together and then do thin provisioning. And I don't know if you saw that this Delta, we now, in the past, right, NTFS was designed around SCSI. Well, it turns out some of the inexpensive SATA drives didn't correctly implement a number of the commands. Basically, they lie to you. And so, it's like, okay, great, look good on a benchmark, not so good when there's a power outage, and now we don't have a data inconsistency.
Right.
So now we detect that and modify our flushing algorithms so that we ensure right consistency and get great reliability from notebook drives all the way up to these very large sets of SATA drives. So now you can more safely take advantage of commodity components.
Well, so it raises an interesting question. A lot of companies are still upgrading to R2. There's still quite a market out there for that, and so now Windows Server 8 is going to come out sometime end of the year or beginning of next year, something like that. And there's a big push for private cloud. And a lot of people standing around going, okay, how do I do this private cloud thing? And I think you've partly answered the question. Storage is one of the reasons that you should, instead of just continuing with R2, storage is one of the reasons you should use Server 8 as you're building your private cloud in your next generation infrastructure.
Yeah. Yep, although that said, I was recently at, well, you guys were there as well, at VMworld, and what I found very interesting was how many people adopt the new hypervisor so quickly. Often when you think of a server release, people adopt over, X period of time. But in these virtualized environments, these virtual cloud environments, it's very easy to go from one version to the next version to the next version. So I guess what I'm saying is that right now, a lot of people are being very successful implementing private clouds with 2008 R2 and the new version of SCVVM. I think they're going to even be more successful. I don't know if you've looked at the features of that, but it's really great stuff. And the nice thing is that they can safely adopt that, and then when Windows 8 comes out, the ability to take all those virtualized environments and just change the hypervisor to the Windows 8 hypervisor, take advantage of the storage stack. It's not I'm going to wait. You can implement now and then just migrate over.
So you mentioned it too, and this is one of the other big things that we were really impressed with was some of the changes coming up with the new Windows hypervisor and virtualization with Server 8.
Yeah,
exactly. Want to tell us a little bit about some of those, what they are?
Yeah, so first is scale. And it's not limited just virtualization. There's been a strong push, from the very beginning on scale, finding out all throughout the stack where the bottlenecks were and fixing those. So now we go up to 640 CPUs. I don't know if you asked, but a lot of people ask, well, wait, you went from 256 to 512? No, 640, what's that? And the answer, of course, is the number of cores per CPU. They go from 8 to 10 cores. So 10 cores, 64 processors. So that's what that is.
Okay.
So yeah, 640 processors, 4 terabytes of RAM. I mean, it's just phenomenal. When you have a virtualized machine, you can now have 160 processors and 2 terabytes of RAM. And then the VMs themselves, 32 processor VMs and 512 gigabytes of RAM. And by the way, that's the stuff that we announced at Build.
Yeah, those are huge increases in scale.
It's at this point, it's just a matter of, it's like when we talk about Bill Gates' fortune, it's just a matter of counting numbers now, because really the lid is off, is essentially what that's saying, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
And this is version 3 of the hypervisor too. Do you want to tell us a little bit about version 3?
Yeah, so at the reviewer's guide, I mentioned this, that the vast majority of my 31 years in the industry have been working for companies that competed against Microsoft. And Microsoft would enter a marketplace, and we'd be very quick to point out their failings and their flaws, and they missed that, and they don't understand this, and we'd laugh sometimes and pat ourselves on the back and feel very confident. But honestly, we always knew, sell your stock options before version 3 hits the ground, right? Because there's something about Microsoft, as no matter what, by version 3, they've dialed it in and they figured it out, and they come out with the value proposition that just makes it very, very tough. I mean, they just do a great job in version 3. And that certainly is the case with hypervisor and virtualization. It's not just about scale, but the ability to do the replication. Right? We've got like the best replication story out there, achieving what some people call the holy grail of replication, where not only can I do replicas based upon a cluster, I can do it without cluster using shared storage, or just having an Ethernet cable.
And seeing the demo with just a crossover cable is pretty impressive.
Exactly, and the ability to do that, do the replication, synchronously or asynchronously, and the ability for disaster recovery scenarios, where you can say, hey, I'm running this here, and then asynchronously replicating it, perhaps in the cloud to a hoster, in case anything goes wrong here, like, hey, machines go down, that happens. But sometimes entire sites go down. So the ability to just kind of like inexpensively back that up to the cloud is just a wonderful story.
Yeah, I think you bring up a key point too, which is the inexpensive part of that.
Exactly.
So for small and medium businesses, they don't have to pay an arm and a leg.
Yeah, it's true. VMware has been criticized for being an expensive solution, and it seems like they become more expensive all the time. And so with Hyper-V built into Windows Server 8, it is a good value proposition for businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses.
Well, this is Microsoft's history and our distinct competence. The ability to take very high-end, very expensive computing and make it available to the masses. You see that both with virtualization, where, very high-end, now increasingly expensive. I think they figured out that version 3 is coming out, so they're trying to jack up the prices to get the money while they can, honestly. But indeed, you'll see that with virtualization. You see that that with the storage. You see that with the management. We take high-end stuff. The other is RDMA. So RDMA is remote direct memory access, this ability to say I've got a specialized NIC that allows me to basically have an alternate path, network path to TCP. And what it does is just amazingly fast, amazingly low latency, because it's all done in the hardware. And in the past, that was really done by the high performance computing world, right? So the X thousand guys had paid through the nose to get these great NICs, get fantastic performance. But now what we're saying is, hey, you hardware vendors, everybody should be delivering NICs like that, because now, in addition to those scenarios, which continue to exist, we now have a kernel mode API that can access that, and we take advantage of that kernel mode API with SMB. So now SMB Direct is the ability to use this RDMA and just go fast as the wind. I mean, that's the other thing we did. We didn't finish the storage stack. SMB, good Lord, the benefits those guys have done. You change the protocol so we can use multiple TCP connections on the same SMB session, which means I can have as many NICs as I want connected between source and destination. The session is dynamic, right? So I can remove a NIC and dynamically adjust. I can add a NIC, dynamically adjust. So you have maximum bandwidth and maximum resiliency. And then this was the most impressive thing, in my opinion, was this fast failover, which is to say, in the past, if you clustered your file server, we raised the bar from high availability to continuous availability. High availability says, well, if something goes wrong, you can fail over and you can restart your operation and succeed. Continuous availability says a failure occurred, we detected it and resolved it quick enough that the application never noticed it. Right? The operation takes a little bit longer, but it doesn't time out. And that, let me tell you, is a lot of hard work. And they did it. So now all of a sudden I can be using this bandwidth, that remote file server can go down, it can automatically fail over. The clustered file servers can have 63 nodes in it. Do you ever wonder why it wasn't 64?
I did wonder that.
So the answer is that the cluster ID has only so many bits, and one of them's the value 00 is a reserved value. So if we need more, we'll make more. But 63 seems like...
Yeah, 64 is a magical number in computing. And why did we stop one short? I never got that.
I know. Room for expansion. It allows us to have a conversation. Conversation piece.
No, you're right. I mean, that was the storage team that was cracking me up, the storage team, because there was literally a line of PMs in the back of the room, and they would come up and they would do their demo, and then they would exit out the room through by the side of the podium. There were so many demos for storage we were getting just carpet bombed.
Yeah, one of the points that you kind of touched on there's now built-in NIC teaming with Server 8 as well, right?
Right.
So you don't have to have
32.
specialized vendor NICs any longer to get this kind of ability.
Right, and at some point you can say, oh, well, I got that from my vendor in the past. Well, yes and no. Yes, you could, but it would only work with that vendor's NICs. You couldn't have heterogeneous NICs. And if you ever had any problem and you called up Microsoft and you said, oh, I'm using NIC teaming, I said, okay, well, turn that off, because, just turn that off. And it's like, well, but that might be the issue. It's like, well, and now it's supported by us, so you call and we'll help you through that. But yeah, up to 32 NICs on the NIC team, just phenomenal.
Right.
I don't know if you saw that, but then also, again, just the performance team did such a great job paying attention to the NUMA algorithms. NUMA is this non-memory uniformed architecture.
Right, and it's especially important for performance in VMs, isn't that right?
Huge. Yeah, because today, I don't know if you're aware with this, but basically you can't buy a server today that's not NUMA. Right? And so the NUMA basically says there's some things that are cheap and some things that are expensive to do, and then the software has to be aware of that and pay attention to it, otherwise you have bad performance. And so we've just gone throughout the entire stack looking for these problems. The receive side scaling, which is to say, oh, if I got a lot of the bandwidth coming in, it all goes to the same processor, well, there's only so big you can go, so you want to fan it out. And then you want to fan it out in a way that's aware of the NUMA topology. So you're not just saying, well, I fan it all to these nodes, but they're all in the same NUMA node, because then that doesn't fan out. So just fantastic scaling.
Right, and that can kind of give you linear scaling as you're moving up in terms of processors and cores and that sort of thing.
Yeah, did you see those numbers? I mean, I had to go back and say, you need to check your numbers because that doesn't make any sense. I've never heard of this. This is the scalability of VMs, and basically it was, I think it was from, let's see, it was 8 to 16. You have a SQL workload, and you went from an 8 CPU VM to a 16 CPU, and I think it's like 1.7x scaling, which is just phenomenal. You'd expect 1.4.
Right.
1.5, you're like, can I shake your hand? They got 1.7. But here's the one that honestly, I just keep thinking, I don't think that's possible. I don't know how you do this. But from 16 to 32, it was 1.9. I mean, that's just crazy numbers.
Right. That's some great engineering that makes that happen.
That's exactly right. And this thing about it's just not a bolt-on, right? Mm-hmm. It requires work at every single layer of the stack. Like in the management space, same thing. I was pointing out that, we have this new multi-machine server manager, right? But in fact, that's just a very thin layer on top of the multi-machine management capabilities within the OS. And that had changes at the protocol level, at the PowerShell level, had to make changes to WMI. Just at each layer, we had to make a set of changes to be able to support that.
Right. I was just playing with the Active Directory portion of it over the weekend, and something that's just cracked me up is, one of the things that has always been a bit of a scare for administrators is the forest and domain upgrade and the all those aspects of it. And to do this took basically 13 lines of PowerShell code. I went through the wizard and said, "You want to see what the code is to it?" Yeah, there's 13 lines of PowerShell code. I hit go. It ran 80 prep forest prep, at 80 prep domain prep, whatever else it needed to do. It just says upgrading forest, done. Upgrading domain, done. Promoting domain controller, done. Would you like to reboot? Like, wow. 13 lines of PowerShell code.
You really touched on something that's going to be super important, I think, with Server 8 as well, and that is the changing management paradigm. Server 8 you've taken a different look at how administrators should manage servers.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Absolutely. In the past, you bought a server and, full server was the default, right? You get a GUI with it,
right.
And there was the server core, and some specialized people would do it, but there was a lot of issues with it. So each release we've invested in server core, made it better and better, be able to support more roles, be able to do more manageability. And now with Windows Server 8, we're confident enough to say that now with Windows Server 8, it is the preferred management deployment role. It is the preferred deployment role, and that full server is still there as a compatibility mode, but by and large, we want everybody to do server core, which is basically to say headless server. You still support GUIs. We're not walking away from GUIs. GUIs are what make the company great. GUIs help customers, etc.
Sure.
But those GUIs should run on the client. On the client, consume as much CPU and as much memory as you want because it's a client. Obviously, you don't want that on a server. And then layer that GUI on top of PowerShell, remote PowerShell, so that I can do multi-machine management, and then anything I can do from the GUI, I can then automate.
So so you're saying out of the box, then Server 8 is going to come in the server core. That's going to be the default installation option. But in the past, it was difficult to switch back and forth between server core and the full installation. Has that changed?
Yeah. So why are we confident? Basically, 3 answers. So in the past, it was you chose server core or you chose Windows Server, and if you made a mistake, well, start over. And now you can go from server core to full server and back again. And in fact, there's something in between, which is to say with full server, you can take off the Metro shell and IE. Yeah, and so you can still run GUIs, you can still run Server Manager, but you launch it from the command line.
Oh, interesting.
What this does is it gives you many of the benefits of Server Core in terms of reduced footprint, reduced serviceability, which is to say fewer patches. For those people who haven't been able to make the full transition, either the admin hasn't been able to do that, they're not fully cognizant of PowerShell or remote management, or an application. Like often what we found in our compatibility tests is that an application will require the GUI for installation, but not operations.
Right.
So
Right.
it gives that halfway point.
And it gives the administrator a certain degree of comfort that they can install it and make sure, okay, everything's working the way I want to do it. Maybe even, if they wanted to make that part of the deployment process.
Exactly.
Get it all set up, get it all working, now take the GUI away.
Exactly.
And-
So I mentioned three things. That was one, it's now safer, reduce the risk. The second is manageability. In the past, PowerShell version 1 shipped with about 130 commandlets. PowerShell version 2 shipped with 230 commandlets. And now we ship with over 2,300 commandlets. So over a factor of 100 more
It's a
commandlets.
PowerShell explosion.
It is a PowerShell explosion. It's phenomenal. And so now you really can do full management of the box locally. And if you want to now, we have the remote management. Like in the past, like Server Manager couldn't remotely install a role, and now you
Right,
can.
right.
So you still use the GUI, but you do it remotely. And then the third thing was role availability, that there were certain roles that required full server. And now more and more of those require server core. And most importantly now, the Denali release of SQL runs on server core. So we're feeling pretty confident in this. And this
Right.
is certainly one of the strong messages we have to everyone in the community is to, the ISVs, is to, hey, love the GUI, just don't run it on the server. Run it on a client, use PowerShell remoting to the server.
Can you say, since much of what Server 8 is focused on is helping the customer build their own private cloud, and certainly it will be used as a major component in the public cloud as well. Anything that is enhancements that have been made to identity to help with the integration, because I know we're looking at building private cloud now and going to something that is hybrid. So the ability to have some portability between the two, certainly something to do with Active Directory Federation services. I just wondered if there anything that has been done in that area, if there are any improvements that you're aware of or anything like that.
Yeah, the big investment there that we made is the area of the roles-based administration. A lot of this is not just the technology itself, but is it easy? So I recently gave a talk in Japan where I was trying to explain our investments in continuous availability. And I said, look, basically we're trying to achieve three things. One, more nines. Okay? 2, more nines per dollar, and 3, easier nines. Which is to say, hey, you can have all this capability, but it requires regular people to be able to put it together. If you require like the world's best admins at their best, fully trained, then you're not really going to get the continuous availability. Well, same sort of thing in the area of identity and access control. Hey, we got these great capabilities, but sometimes they can just get like, what? Do I understand this? And so this is one of the big things we've done in 8 is to take the roles-based access and, I'm not using the right term, rights management?
Yeah, you're thinking of flexible, are you talking about flexible access control?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
The ability to say, hey, these roles, I want to automatically identify these files with a set of attributes, high business impact, et cetera, who owns it, et cetera, and then say, hey, you can have read access if you belong to this department. So it's not just identity and group, but a richer set of access rights.
Actually, yeah, incorporating claims.
Claims-based, thank you. Claims-based access
Incorporating
control.
claims into the file system.
Yes.
For starters, I assume that this proves effective. We'll see it in other areas as well.
Yeah.
I have an offbeat question I'd like to ask.
Go for it.
So, because years ago, and we're talking NT4 or something like that, it had been claimed that the Windows operating system was one of the most complex constructs known to man. I mean, just because of what it is. And at the time, I think they were throwing around 6 million lines of code or something like that. And just what Server 8 is and what it's encompassed and all of the things like that. You, if anyone, should have, I don't know if you can say it, have any idea of how big this thing is?
I don't know the answer to that. How big? But certainly,
It's big. It's really big.
Yeah, well, I can agree with that.
certainly we've added more features, but we've also gone and try and reuse things.
True.
Right?
It doesn't necessarily mean bloated or anything like
Dijkstra once said that you should reward your programmers as an inverse proportion to the number of lines of code that they write.
Yeah.
So, there's something to that, which is to say we're constantly looking for, hey, how do we pare this down?
Right.
How do we make it smaller? I don't know if you saw Sinofsky's keynote.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, I got to tell you, the part of that keynote, did you see it?
Sure, yeah.
The part that just made me on the edge of my chair was when he brought out his laptop or his netbook from the Windows 7 launch. And he said, when we had this, here's how much memory it consumed. By SP1, we had gotten it down to this. And now with Windows 8, it's down, and what was it, like hundreds of megs, 120 some odd megs less.
Right.
It's just phenomenal.
Its footprint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we continually work to try and reduce both resource consumption, but also, the footprint of the code.
Right.
Now, Server 8 and Windows 8, they're sharing the same kernel, aren't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely, always. Yep. Yeah, and that's why, same kernel, same GUI. There is one Windows. It takes on different flavors, but there's one Windows. And so some people ask, well, why did Windows Server, adopt the Metro UI? It's like, I don't understand the question. There is only one Windows. So when Windows has a new UI, Windows has a new UI. I can get why you might say, geez, I'm not sure I want that on my server, and that's why we have Server Core.
Yeah, you can take it off. Yeah.
Exactly.
If you don't want it, it's gone.
Exactly.
Right.
But it's actually quite a great UI on a client desktop, especially if you have touch. They've done some great stuff. Just you wouldn't want that consuming the resources of your server.
Right.
And that's the thing I try and point out. It's like, look, if you have a SQL server, you want every single transistor delivering transactions, because that's like its job. Now, when it comes to GUIs, guess what? We want to deliver, I'll consume all available CPU cycles, memory to deliver the experience, because it's all about you.
Well, that's the difference between client and server. You want it all on the client, and the server, you want it to be part of your infrastructure, so it sits in the back end, and you don't really mess with that much.
Exactly, and I never want to get into the situation where somebody says, well, hey, the right thing to do for the user experience is X, but that'll consume too many CPU cycles from the workload. It's like, no. You're thinking about it wrong.
Right. Two different places.
Exactly. So that's why I'm pretty hardcore on that.
I do have one more question for you. And it's since you're the inventor of PowerShell, PowerShell is obviously going to be a big thing in
Can I
Server 8.
just say, I came up with the original idea,
I
but
know.
honestly, it's a team effort.
I know, of
cannot
course,
tell you
of
how
course.
many great people we have working on it.
Yeah, just kidding. But
Okay.
a lot of administrators, though, they're not familiar with PowerShell. They've struggled to get into it. They kind of know Windows shell scripting. Maybe they know VB script, but PowerShell has been a little daunting to them. What is there to help them to get going with it? And as you've helped create this, what kinds of advice can you give them to learn to adopt it, to be able to take advantage of it and move towards it?
Yeah, ultimately, what we'd like to say is that PowerShell is the glue code, right? We glue things together. So we deal with the world as it is, right? So it's a messy world. So ultimately, we're trying to drive to these commandlets, these high-level, task-oriented abstractions that allow somebody to think about what they want, type it, and get it, right? So you mentioned this very complex thing, but it turned out to be only 13 command lines, right? Ultimately, perfection would be do/my job/order me a pizza,
Hello,
pepperoni.
computer.
Yeah. So obviously we're not going to get there, but if you think about what you want and you can type it and get it, PowerShell's very easy. The fact that you have to type it, honestly, that's you type in Google, you type in Bing.
Right.
People, this is not a big issue. It's a different input device, but that's not the issue. But if you think about something and can't type it and get it, then in the past you had to go do some COM programming or find some WMI classes or invoke some command line shell and parse the output. And that could get pretty rough. And indeed, we've got a group of people who just love that stuff. Hey, let me show you how tough I am. I can do this really tough stuff. And they love it. We have people very successful at that. But ultimately, a bunch of people just want to be able to type it and get it they want. So this is where the 130, 230, 2,300 command
Much
lists
more
come
comprehensive coverage of what the platform
Exactly.
does.
So you don't have to jiggle around so much to get something done. There's now probably one command
in. Yes, exactly.
to get it done, which makes it easier.
Yep.
And also, I know there are features, for example, in Active Directory, there's I think it's called a commandlet window, where you can see them going past as you're manipulating users and things like that. So you can see what they're doing and kind of giving you a feedback to it.
Yep.
As we are moving to various degrees of comfort towards a cloud computing era,
Yep.
one of the key tenets of it is automation. And if you're going to have any kind of an automation that involves Microsoft products, for the IT pros out there, you got to learn PowerShell.
Absolutely. In fact, that's the topic of my keynote speech. But there's more to it than this. So there's first the high-level commandlet coverage.
Right.
We've simplified the syntax. Basically, it's what I call the war on scripting. Hey, you shouldn't have to script. What are the elements where people have to script, and how can we minimize that? Then we've provided the integrated scripting environment that makes it a ton easier. So now as you're typing, you can get IntelliSense.
Oh, nice.
And you get tab completion and wonderful stuff. Then we have this new thing called show command. Show command, you run it, and it shows you all the commands. And you can select the command. You say, well, I want to do something with a VHD. So you type VHD, and it shows you everything associated with the VHD. And then you can click the new VHD, and it brings up a GUI window saying, oh, fill this in, fill this in, fill this
Sort of
in,
a hybrid.
run it.
That's exactly the kind of thing that could help you make the transition into the new
PowerShell and
environment.
training wheels.
Exactly. There you go. And we're working with something. This will ship before Windows 8 and ship out of box, but it's a script sharing facility, which allows people to say, hey, I'm interested in something around virtualization or something around Exchange. And what it does is it has this search aggregation service, which is looking at all these various script repositories, aggregates them, and delivers you the results along with a reputation service.
Oh, nice.
So you can then say, oh, yeah, no, that looks good. And then you can copy the script and make it your own. And it's a very clever technology. In fact, you can set it up so that you can set up a local one as well. So a big company can say,
Within a company.
yeah, hey, point this thing at my script repository.
Right.
I want you using ours, not the community's, or
Right. I really like that you're incorporating reputation into it.
Yeah.
That's a really big plus.
yeah. Yeah, so we've certainly thought about the issues of, hey, that PowerShell stuff, that was great for those guys in the past, but I'm here and I'm a little bit nervous about that. And honestly, we've had some great success with that. I think I don't know if I mentioned my story about the tech ed last year at Bourbon Street. The guy coming up to me saying,
It's a great story.
yeah, he says, oh, thank you. I said, oh, thank you for what? He says, well, thank you for PowerShell. Last year, my boss came to me and said, hey, you got to learn PowerShell. That's the thing to learn. And he says, no, I'm a GUI guy. I don't want to learn this PowerShell thing. I just don't want to do it. And his boss told me, he said, you got to do it. I said, okay, great. And so a week later, I'll tell you, I was just having a blast. What you've produced is so much fun. I forgot, computing used to be fun, and then for some reason it sort of stopped being fun. Well, it's fun again, so thank you for that. He says, and so I'm having a blast with this thing. And then a couple weeks ago was my review time. And I knew what it was going to say. I topped out my career about 5 years ago, so I knew it was going to say, 1%, thanks. So I got my paper and I'm about to walk out. And my boss says, no, stop, read it. I was like, oh no, does that mean I'm fired? And so I sat down, I read it, and I got a 17% raise.
Wow.
And his boss says, since you learned PowerShell, you've just been so much more productive. Thank you. You're just a huge asset to this company. I just want you to know that. And I got to tell you that I've got a number of stories like that. But that to me is what success looks like, right? IT pros being successful. There are some big challenges to the IT pro community. I'm going to articulate those in my talk today. The cloud, it's wonderful, but it requires changes on the part of IT pros, right? A bunch of people are going to prosper through this change, others will not. And so I'm trying to articulate those scenarios as to, hey, here's where I think it's going to do well, and here's where I think the opportunities are. And honestly, it's all about automation. I like to joke, but it's honestly true. Bill Gates will pay any of us $1 million a year if you can produce enough value. Right? The trick is, how do you produce enough value? Now here's the thing. If you just take a GUI and here's a mouse, go at it. Well, it's kind of hard to differentiate a really smart guy from a not so smart guy with a mouse, right? You're like, can you click faster? Like, no, not a little bit, But with automation, it's basically the skill amplifier. You're able to be much more productive. I mean, that's ultimately the test of a technology. Put it in front of a junior person, put it in an expert person. How much more of a delta can you be? And PowerShell acts like a big amplifier. So people that are skilled can produce a lot more. I mean, just ton more productivity, enough so that this guy was able to get 17% in really a lousy economy.
Yeah.
And I've got a number of examples like that. So,
Well,
That's
I
fantastic.
look forward to hearing the keynote. We here at the magazine and all of our websites talk a lot about the IT pro and the IT pro in their career and their worries about the future and all that sort of thing. So that it'll be very interesting to hear you.
you know, I did some deep
Thoughts?
thinking on the topic and came to some non-obvious conclusions, or well, certainly conclusions that I've not heard other people discuss. So.
Well, we're
Very
looking
good.
forward to it.